Everybody and their grandmother talks about the Sunnah and adherence to the Sunnah. This is a good thing. We're told in the Quran, of course, that in the beloved Prophet we have Uswatun Hasana. We have a beautiful, lovely paradigm. But what is it that makes you Muhammadi? Is it the length of your beard? Is it that you walk around with a miswak stick in your pocket? Or is it that you actually take a look at the fact that the word revolution, in the Old English sense, comes from a root of transforming, of turning, of changing your ways around. Look into our Arabic language, Persian language. What's the word for revolution? Inqilab. What root does inqilab come from? Qalb. One of the problems that we are having is that many people want to have a revolution. We want to have an economic revolution. We want to have a political revolution. And we need them because the system is broke. It's not working. It can't work. But we're trying to have that revolution without doing the necessary heart revolution, the transformation that is required of us individually and collectively as a community. You get the flip side of that too. I've got my lovely Sufi friends who are the sweetest, kindest people in the whole world, and you're like, you know, there's 500,000 people starving in East Africa. It's terrible. I'll go do a zikr for them. I'm like, good. And we're told that there's 1 million Iraqis who've been wiped out. I'll go to my prayer chamber and put on some candles and incense and do a meditation. Good. And inner reflection and outer action. These two have to be linked up together. Let me give you one sense of how we fail to do this. Look at one of the great buzzwords of the last 20 years. Jihad. Or the way white people like to say it, jihad. There's a couple of ways in which that term has been used. We all know the Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda usage of the term, right? The so-called fatwas. Kill them all wherever you find them. Americans and their allies. Civilians and military alike. Kill them all. That's one kind of jihad. How do we respond to that? Well, every Muslim group that I know, in the aftermath of 9/11, did two things. One, cite from the verses in the Quran that says, if you kill one human, it is as if you have killed the whole of humanity. If you save one life, it's as if you have saved the whole of humanity. They'll usually leave out a part in the middle of that verse, which kind of would complicate the picture, but whatever. And then half of them go back to the anecdote from, again, our beloved Prophet. The Prophet and his companions are coming back from a major battle. They've almost gotten killed. The Prophet, in his, as we say, may my life be ransom for him, slightly dry humor, turns to his followers and says, we have now returned from the lesser jihad, ready to resume the greater jihad. And the Sahaba, the companions, were only there to make the Prophet look good. That's their function in the stories. They get to be the straight man ask all the dumb questions. And they say exactly what you expect them to say. Ya Rasulullah, may our lives be ransom for you. Pray tell, if that big battle in which we almost died was the small jihad, then what's the big jihad? And the Prophet says, aha, I'm glad you asked. The big jihad is the jihad against your own demons, your own carnal self, your own nafs. Right? Every Muslim group that I know cited that Quran verse and that story of the Prophet. I'm not dismissing the paramount importance of the jihad of the nafs. This is one of the foundations of the Sufi path. What I'm talking about instead for our time is the necessity of connecting the jihad of the nafs with the jihad in the world, with the struggle in the world. And in this day and age, you can't just toss out a word like jihad in the world without specifying the means. One of the things that we know is that the means that we utilize have to be as noble as the aims that we aspire to. But the basic point remains. My spiritual development is connected to my social exertion in the world. And that linkage goes back to the very foundations of the Quran, where we are told, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ. God commands you to two things. Adl, justice. Justice which by definition is social. Social justice. Ihsan. What is ihsan? Or ihsan, excuse me. To bring into reality that which is beautiful and lovely. Right? Ihsan is the code word for the aesthetic and spiritual cultivation of the human soul. In the first hadith that we hear from the Prophet, Hadith of Jibreel, this is the culmination of faith, where you start with Islam, move to Iman, and the highest level is Ihsan. So spiritual cultivation of the self and the quest for social justice are linked up together, going all the way back to the Quran. And of course, in the example of the Prophet. I'm a dad, as I said, I've got 4 kids, so we don't get to watch French films, we don't get to watch anything artsy. If it's in the New York Times, I haven't seen it. We just get to see Disney and Pixar. That's all I've seen the last 15 years. That's my level of literate engagement with the world of high cinema. So I've seen Mary Poppins 50 times. I've seen Lion King 100 times. And I was watching Lion King and realizing just what a deep Sufi story it is. Because you've got Mufasa, sounds a lot like Mustafa, saying to his son, Simba, remember who you are. And Simba is like, but Dad, Hakuna Matata. And Dad is like, you're eating maggots. You're eating worms. You weren't meant for this. This is our story. Just as the word prophet, prophetic, is used in the American vernacular, not necessarily in the Muslim vernacular, there we also use the phrase God's children to refer to humanity. God's children, the children of Adam, the members of humanity, we are not designed to live as we are living now. The way that we find ourselves living, simply put, is not how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to live. And I'll give you one simple observation of that. 1 out of every 3 children in America lives in poverty. We're the richest nation on earth. But we're messing up. We got the money, but we're putting it in the war machine. We're broken because of poor choices, corporate greed, and a broken political system. Where do you think the Prophet would stand? Where did he go to when he went up against the merchants of Mecca, the 1% of his time? Did he say to them, well, this is private property, and I don't think we're in any position to critique the accumulation of private property? Or did he say to them, that which you hoard will be poured through you in the life to come? There is such a thing as a responsible sharing of wealth. The way Martin would have put it, I know where our wealth belongs. It's in the wrinkled stomachs of God's children. I started out by saying that I know these are difficult days. I know these are hard days. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf from right down the road has a nice saying where he says, we now live in an age where Muslims have accomplished the almost impossible. We have taken the religion of Islam and we have made it ugly. Which actually is an extraordinary achievement. And this is true. We were told, of course, that the day will come, Islam began as a stranger and it will return as a stranger. I don't know if we live in the end of days, but the Islam that I see around me in many places is a strange kind of Islam. It is missing compassion, missing love, missing arts, missing beauty, missing justice, missing community. I have never been called Brother Omid so often by people that don't seem to know what calling someone brother seems to mean. If we're going to call each other brother and sister, that implies family. And if we're going to be a family, that love, that affection, that sacrifice, that humor has to be a part of that. Otherwise, let's just be honest and call each other Kafir Omid. If that's what you mean, and if that's the intention, then call it what it is. But if I were to add something to what Sheikh Hamza says, it's not that just we live in an age where we have made things ugly. Because my parents named me Omid, and I have to hang on to that hope, I want to hang on to the hope that we live in a day, in an age, where we are beginning to see a restoration of a sense of loveliness to our traditions. Someday, I want to be able to tell my children and my children's children, your children and your children's children, that we lived in an age, a dark age, a hateful age, an economically exploitative age. But we saw not the one great Mahdi who's going to come and rescue us, not the one great leader who's going to speak for all of us, but we saw a whole generation of people rise up and say, this system is broke. This distribution of our limited resources, which belong to all of us, cannot be used to sustain so few. 1% of Americans cannot own 40% of the wealth. 1 out of every 5 people on this planet cannot live on $1 a day. Let me go back to that example of Martin. He didn't just say that a nation that spends more on military than on education and welfare is approaching spiritual death. He also said that he believes in a noble American dream. But he called it an unfinished American experiment. Unfinished. The American dream is noble. We all know how it's imperfect. We can go back to the Native American, the treatment of humans who were stolen and brought over here as slaves. They weren't African slaves. They were human, free humans, noble humans who were stolen and brought over here as slaves. We can look at the treatment of women, the treatment of Irish, the treatment of Jews, the treatment of gays and lesbians. It's a long list. And today, of course, the treatment of Muslims, the treatment of Hispanics. If you care about that, if you're concerned about that, how do we fight it? How do we come up with a better model? One solution is, let's send the Quran to everybody who wants one. That's a failed approach. Education has its role. I'm a teacher. I get up every morning and I teach sleepy 18-year-olds at 8:30 in the morning. I do so because I'm fundamentally convinced that knowledge is more powerful than ignorance. That love is divine and hatred ultimately is an illusion. Education has its part. But if you want to restore a sense of nobility to the American experiment, then join in solidarity with those who want to restore a sense of loveliness to the American dream. That means opening your hand, stretching it out, reaching out to people like the beautiful, noble, sometimes clueless people in the Occupy movement, finding out what other struggles are going on and being an ally. We have gone for too long expecting other people to care about our persecution when we had done damn thing to lift a finger to help anybody else. Many of us, a lot of us have, and a lot of us have paid a high price, but not enough. And I would say the same thing goes for our engagement with Islam. I don't recognize this cardboard Islam. I grew up on something that was delicious. I grew up on the Islam, not just of the Quran, not just of the Prophet, not just of Imam Ali and Imam Hussein, but also of Mawlavi and Attar and Sadi and Hafiz and the legacy of the Safavids and the Mughals and the Ottomans. And day after day after day, I go to majlises and rehlas and deen-intensive programs where Islam, for all practical purposes, ended in the year 1300 in the Arabic language. God's grace doesn't end. God's blessings for humanity and the inspiration for humanity doesn't end, and it continues to flow through today. If we open up our hearts and receive that, inshallah, we can get somewhere. And let me end, and then I can open it up, and maybe if you want, I'll even read you a passage from this book. I imagine this is how all of your author sessions go. In saying that as the children of an Iranian mom, I have been subjected to 41 proud years of the guilt and shame culture, right? Just as we invented, as my mother would say, we might not have invented God, but other than that, we invented love and poetry and nobility and all these kind of things. As I was telling in the car to Mr. Rouhani, a few cultures, particularly post-colonial cultures, suffer from an inferiority complex, we Iranians have been blessed with a massive and terminal case of a superiority complex. Yes, and may we get therapy to help us deal with that. But, having been born in an Iranian family, I've been raised with a guilt culture, right? What do you mean you only got a 105 on your test? Mr. Nabizade's family got 107. I was like, but Mom, I got 105. It's already an A+. Guilt and shame do not transform people towards lovelier. A lot of us can look back on what's being done in the name of Islam. Al-Qaeda, oppression of women, suicide bombing, Saudi capitalist idiocy, oppression and brutality in different Muslim countries. You might feel ashamed. You might feel guilty. You might look at this society, at corporate greed, at the way that we thought our progressive president was going to messianically redeem American politics. And you might feel ashamed of where America is today, but that will not transform us towards anything better. If you feel a sense of disappointment in Islam, a disappointment in American culture, remember that there can be no disappointment where there's also not great love. And to redeem the American experiment and to redeem the prophetic challenge of the prophet can be done and needs to be done through love for God, love for prophet, love for the tradition, and most importantly, love for all of God's children. May it be that, inshallah, we're participants in that and we leave something more beautiful for our children than what we have found today. Amen.